Okay, hi everyone. I'd like to thank you for not moving into the other room. I realize that writing reports is a slightly dry subject. I'd like to also thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm going to talk about automating the process of writing reports. So I'm going to talk about three things today. Firstly, communicating insights and writing reports, storytelling. I'm also going to talk about Google Apps Script and the Google Drive API and various other Google APIs. And then I'm also going to talk about coffee. So I'm hoping that there's going to be something here for everyone. So I'm going to start by telling you a bit about me. I'm actually a statistician by training. So I have a PhD in statistical genetics from the University of Oxford. And partway through my PhD, I read the Harvard Business Review article about data science being the sexiest job of the 21st century. So I figured I might give that a go. I did an 8-week data science bootcamp at the Advanced Skills Initiative in London. So this is a free course. I'd actually highly recommend it if you're interested. It's part hands-on and it's part taught. I actually got the opportunity to work at Just Eat. And now I'm a data scientist at a startup called Second Measure. So we're a fairly small startup. We've only been going for a year, and based in San Francisco, and we analyze consumer spending data. So to give you an example of the sort of thing that we do, this is data from our platform, and I've pulled this figure from one of our blogs. And this is showing the index number of paying customers for Chipotle Mexican Grill, which is a fast food restaurant in the US. So Chipotle actually hasn't been having a great year. Starting last summer, there were quite a lot of reports of people getting sick after eating at their restaurants. And then there was a suspected E. coli outbreak at some restaurants in Washington and Oregon in October 2015. And as you can see from this plot, this outbreak resulted in a drop in the number of paying customers at Chipotle. To try to encourage customers to return to their restaurants, in February 2016, they started offering a free burrito promotion. And based on the data from our platform, we can actually see that not only are customers returning for free burritos, but they're also returning for regular meals as well. So what do I do as a data scientist at Second Measure? So this is actually a survey of 80 data scientists performed on Crowdflower. And as I'm sure you all know, data scientists spend a lot of their time mining, so collecting data sets and also cleaning and organizing data. This doesn't actually reflect my experience. I spend a lot of my time writing reports and communicating insights. And I actually feel that this is the most important thing a data scientist can do. If you create the best model in the world, but you can't describe it to your CTO, to your investors, or to the salespeople in your company, or even to fellow data scientists, then that model is not going to be used. So this is specifically my motivation for giving this talk. I do a lot of my analysis using IPython notebooks, and the reason for that is that they're very easy to use. I like inline plotting, and they're very readable if I want to come back to them. However, not everyone else in my company wants to see IPython notebooks. They like seeing dashboards, potentially interactive dashboards. We get a lot of our data is time series, so we like to see those time series update in real time. We also use a lot of Excel spreadsheets or Google spreadsheets, and we also use Google Drive a lot. So that means a lot of reports written in Google Docs. So what I find myself doing quite a lot is updating analyses when we change parameters or updating analyses when the data changes. And that requires updating the reports in Google Docs. So I have to drag and drop a lot of PNGs, which I've saved via IPython notebooks, into my Google Docs. And I don't like doing that because it's a waste of my time. I like being more efficient. So I think this is an appropriate comic at this stage. The title reads, "How long can you work on making routine tasks more efficient before you're spending more time than you save across 5 years?" So I probably spend about an hour a week or maybe more rewriting reports because the data's changed. And reading off from this comic, that actually equates to 10 days per year. So if I can create a method for automating reports in less than 10 days, then I think I'm winning. So I started looking around for methods for automating reports. And actually there are a lot of options, and I can't talk about all of them today, but I'm going to go through a couple. But before I start talking about reports, we have to have some data on which to base these analyses. So I found an open source data set on coffee prices. So this is a data set downloaded from the Economics Web Institute. And we have two different types of coffee prices. So prices paid to growers in exporting ICO countries for 2 coffee brands. So ICO stands for the International Coffee Organization. And we also have the retail price paid by consumers to commercial distributors in importing ICO countries. And this data is per month between 1982 and 2001. So it is quite an old data set. So I started writing a notebook to look at this data. So I'm importing some modules. I then load the data. So the data actually comes as an Excel spreadsheet. It's not totally trivial to read it into Python. But if we look at part of the data set, this is actually the prices paid to growers for Arabica coffee. And if I look at part of that data set, I've formatted it in a pandas data frame with a multi-column index. And like all good data scientists, I'm going to check for missing data. There is actually quite a lot of missing data. And I should also say at this point that I'm not an expert on coffee prices, and I also haven't checked for the reliability of this data. So I'm also going to plot a part of the data set. This is the price paid to growers of coffee in Brazil. So as you might know, Brazil is actually the leading exporter of coffee in the world. They produce about 1/3 of all coffee beans. I think this plot, which shows the cents paid to growers per pound across 20 years, is actually quite interesting. So you can see that there are a variety of peaks and troughs. And in fact, these reflect various natural disasters. So in the mid-1980s, there was actually a drought in Brazil, which resulted in quite a lot of the coffee harvest being killed. And then also in the mid-1990s, there was a really bad frost. So bad frost actually can kill coffee plants. And if that happens, then growers have to plant new coffee plants, and that takes between 4 to 5 years for the coffee to actually blossom again. And that's why the price paid to coffee growers in the 1990s actually stayed fairly high for a couple of years. So one good way of creating reports, and a very easy way of creating reports from my Python notebooks, is to use nbconvert. And this converts, as it says on the tin, it converts notebooks into static formats. So for example, I can convert the notebook into an HTML document. I do that by calling the command ipython nbconvert and then a / to HTML. I can also convert the notebook into a text document, which I can then compile to a PDF. What's quite nice about this is if I want to add equations into my text document, I can write the LaTeX in raw cells, which are not converted using nbconvert, but then will be compiled when you convert the text document to a PDF. So these are great, but probably most people wouldn't want to see the code. So let's look at some other options. So something else I use quite a lot is an online data visualization platform called Plotly. And I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about Plotly in the next 2 days, so I'm going to skip over this fairly quickly. So Plotly is written using Python with a Django web framework. Its front end uses JavaScript and also D3.js. So the resulting graphs are, in my opinion, are really pretty. It has an API library for Python. It also lets you convert plots made using matplotlib or ggplot into Plotly figures. So this is code to create a map using Plotly. So what I thought it might be interesting to look at is the distribution of coffee growers around the world. So I'm not going to go through this in very much detail, but you define the data using a variety of key value pairs. You can also define the layout of the plot, so things like the title, the type of map, the width and the height. And then in this case, I'm actually going to plot something offline. And I'm going to end up with an HTML document containing my map. So if I open this in a web browser, this would actually be an interactive plot. I'd be able to zoom in, and I would also be able to hover over various countries and see the underlying data. But in the interest of time, I've actually just taken a screenshot. So the pale yellow countries are the countries for which we either have no data or there's no coffee grown in those areas. But you can see some interesting patterns. So, for example, coffee likes really rich soil and moderate temperatures, which is why it can only be grown in certain regions in the world. So given we have a plot, it might be nice to create a report, maybe in HTML, and you can embed plotly images within HTML reports using the iframe tag. So you have to specify the width, the height, and also the source. So I'm going to do this, and in the interest of automation, I'm going to use something called Ginger2 to create my HTML directly via Python. So Ginger2 is a template engine for Python. And if you're not familiar with templating engines, if you're not familiar with templating libraries, they actually render to HTML. This is an example. But you can input variables and other logic within this code, which will then be evaluated to actual values. So for example, I've got a title variable, a data_notes variable, and I'm also going to add 2 images to this report. This is the Python code which renders the template. So environment is a class which is going to contain the configurations and the global variables. I'm going to get the template, which I've called ginger_report.html. I've defined the template variables. I'm actually going to look at a map of prices paid to coffee growers of Arabica coffee and also Robusta coffee, which are 2 types of very common coffee beans. And then to render the template, I call template.render. And that's going to give me an HTML string, which it won't surprise you to know looks something like this. So this is the first plot within the report. I could make the report look prettier using some CSS. But what's kind of interesting here is that if I look at the price paid to growers of Arabica coffee and the price paid to growers of Robusta coffee, you can see that they're slightly different. So if I just switch from one to the other, they're on the same scale, and you can notice that Robusta coffee growers actually get paid less. And this is actually because Robusta coffee is less popular. It tends to taste slightly bittery and rubbery. And this is maybe because the amount of caffeine in Robusta coffee is a lot higher than Arabica coffee. And Arabica coffee, on the other hand, has a lot more sugar. So where are we at now? We have a notebook, and I've created a report, either an HTML report, might be interactive, or a PDF. So this is great, but it's not easy for others to add comments or edits. So really what I want is a report in Google Docs, because then people can add comments, and also Google Docs is a great place for me to share reports within my company. So I started looking around, and I found the Google Drive API. So the Google Drive API is one of many Google APIs. In fact, there seems to be an API for pretty much everything. It has a Python client library, and it has a variety of nice properties. So one of the properties is it lets you upload and download files directly from a Python script. And it also lets you convert the files that you've uploaded. So for example, I can convert an HTML document to a Google Doc. So this seemed like a really good start. This is my workflow. I was going to use a notebook, convert it using nbconvert to HTML, and then use the Google Drive API to create a Google Doc. I created some really simple HTML as an example. I've got a header, a paragraph, and a picture. This is what it looks like when I put it into my browser. And this is the code for uploading files using the Google Drive API. So you have to download the client library. You also have to set up some credentials. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but you can see a variety of things. We have to define the scopes. So this tells us what permissions the API has. We have to set the permissions so that the script can upload, edit, and open individual files on Google Drive. I've specified the files that I want to upload. So there are 3 things I want to upload. The picture, and I'm also going to upload test_report.html, which is the HTML code I just showed you. I'm going to upload this twice. So the first time I'm going to not convert it. So the second element in this tuple defines whether I'm going to convert the file or not. The second time I upload it, I'm actually going to convert it to a Google Doc. So I create a connection to the API using the build function. Drive is the name of the API, v2 is the version, and then I'm going to specify some credentials as well. Then I loop through the files. I define some metadata, including the name of the file when I've uploaded it to Google Docs. The media body is also equal to the file name, so that tells you what the content of the file should be, and then define the media type that I'm going to convert it to. And if I run this, I see this in my Google Drive. This is a screenshot. As we might expect, I've managed to upload the image, and then test_report.html is in 2 formats, just raw HTML and also a Google Doc. And if I open the Google Doc, it looks like this. So not such a great report. Unfortunately, the image hasn't embedded within the Google Doc, and it turns out that this is something that Google Drive API actually doesn't support. So I was a little disappointed at this point. I'd spent about a day working on this, and I did hope to have a prototype by now. So I started rethinking, and I decided to try and use Google Apps Script. So Google Apps Script is a scripting language for application development in Google Apps platform. It allows you to create a bunch of things. You can use it to create custom sidebars, menus in docs. If you have a particularly complicated formula in a spreadsheet, you can actually write that as a function within Google Apps Script. You can also make custom forms. So Google Apps Script is based on JavaScript. It runs in your browser, which means you don't have to install anything. So this was my new suggested workflow. I start with a notebook. I'm going to use my own Python script to convert that into JSON. And the idea was that I wanted to extract the text, the figures, and the tables from my notebook that I wanted to put in my final report. So I was going to store that all in a JSON blob. And then I was going to use the Google Apps Script to populate a Google document. So this is a similar notebook that I'm going to use to create the report from. I've added a bit more text. I've got a table. I also have a figure within this notebook as well. So the first thing we have to look at is what is the actual underlying structure of an IPython notebook. And we want to do this because we want to extract part of the source of the notebook. So notebooks have 4 different types of cells. So heading and markdown cells both render to rich structured text. Headings are used to define the outline of the notebook. Markdowns used for text, bullet points, equations, etc. Raw cells I've talked about a little bit before. I'm actually not going to talk about raw cells anymore because I don't use them very much. And then we also have code cells, which are multi-line code input, and then they also have an output as well, which might be a table or a figure. And I can get the underlying structure of the notebook using NB format. So if I look at the variable NB, the first few lines look like this. So this is all metadata, and I can see there are a variety of interesting things here. The version of the IPython notebook that I'm using. If I look at the next few lines, I can start seeing information about cells. So for example, the first cell has got cell type heading, level 1, no metadata, and the source is the text within this cell. Second cell has cell type markdown, no metadata, and again the source is the text. And you can see that this is markdown where I've defined 2 bullet points. So what I'm going to do is write some Python code to extract the information that I want from this variable. I'm not going to go through this in much detail, but if the cell type is markdown or heading, then I'm just going to extract the text. I'm going to use some regex to deal with extracting bullet points, and I'm going to save all this within a Python dictionary called data. So I also have to extract information from code cells, and specifically I want tables and figures. So with tables, I've cheated a little bit. If there's a table in a code cell that I want to extract and put into my report, then I'm going to start the cell with this comment, so the hash mark and then the percentage sign table. And that just makes it easier for me to extract the output from this cell. And then I'm going to use the output field, which gives me the table in an HTML string. I'm going to use Beautiful Soup and reformat the table as a list of lists within Python and save that within the JSON blob. I also want to extract images. I'm again going to use this trick of adding a comment at the beginning of each cell for which there is a figure that I want to extract. And then I'm going to extract the name of the figure by searching for a string such as savefig. So this is what the JSON looks like. I've got a title, summary, and then a list of all the cells within the notebook. So they're either of type heading, text, table, another heading, text, and then an image. So now we've done the first part of this workflow, and we can move on to using Google Apps Scripts. So if you're not familiar with Google Apps Scripts, you can you can start scripting by going to this following URL and press Start Scripting. You end up with something that looks like this. I've actually called my report generate report, and I have an empty function called generate_report. So actually, the underlying structure of a Google document is very similar to an HTML page. So we've got a bunch of elements, and we can insert elements within these elements. So the main class is document app. And document app.create lets me create my own Google document. I can also use this to edit and open Google Documents. Then the main element within this document is going to be the body element, and I can call doc.getBody to create an element for this variable. And this code is pretty simple. All I'm going to do is append a paragraph to the document and change the text to type heading. And we get something that looks like this. So I thought next I should make sure that I can actually input an image. I've got an image called image.jpg within my Google Drive. I'm going to use this code to extract the file ID for this image and then append a paragraph to the document and add the image as an inline image. And hooray, it works. This is how excited I was when it worked. We can also add tables. The table format has to be a list of lists. And this basically gives us all the tools we need to create a report. So basically, I have a fairly generic script now, which loops through cells in the IPython notebook, and depending on the type, will append tables, figures, or text, or headings to a Google document. And this is the first page of the Google Doc you get when you create a report from the notebook I showed you earlier. So we have a table, and then this is the second page. So this is showing the retail price of coffee in France in the 1980s and 1990s. So I'm sure we can make this prettier, but I was actually pretty happy with this. And the final question to ask is, do we have Python to report in one command? So we're almost there, actually. Step one, we have a Python script to upload images to Google Drive. Step two, we have another Python script to convert notebooks to some JSON. And what we want for step 3 is to be able to run a Google Apps script using Python script. And we can actually do that using the Google Apps Script execution API, which does what it says on the tin, basically. So I can now wrap these 3 scripts up within one module, and I do get a single command which I can run to create a Google document report from a notebook. So just to summarize, I've learned a couple of things doing this project. The first one is that I can automate report writing, and I'm actually now using this and saving myself around about 55 minutes a week. This was actually a harder project than I anticipated. I spent a lot of time battling with the permissions on the Google Apps Script and also the Google Drive API. But I also realized that Google Apps Script is also very versatile, and I can now use that to create a variety of widgets which we use within the company on Google Drive. Some of you might have noticed that the solution I've come up with is not totally ideal. There are some scenarios where it's not going to work so well. So for example, if I create a report, if somebody else edits it, the underlying data then changes, and I want to recreate the report. With this current approach, I'm going to end up creating an entirely new report which will not have the original edits. So I'm looking into methods for fixing that, to be able to incorporate the edits and comments into the new report. I'm also thinking about ways to create automatically create reports using Google Spreadsheets, and I think this is actually going to be slightly easier because there is a Google Spreadsheet API which lets you edit specific cells within your spreadsheets. I don't know if you can add images though. And with that, I'm going to finish. Thank you all for listening, and I think we should go and get some coffee.